help them increase their academic performance. So how do we make it user-friendly? Well, let students know the reasons for the assignment. Again, starting with that why. We do a daily language workout in ninth grade English, and I tell students it's to help prepare them for the ACT English test. It's to help improve their writing skills so they know when I write on their paper, comma splice, what they need to do. It's important that we assign both short and long-term homework. It's always good to have kind of two different strands of a class running, maybe a long-term project with various check-in points, but also daily assignments. And provide a variety of assignments with different levels of accountability. And make the work a part of students' grades. This is especially difficult sometimes when we're talking about process. It's easy to grade a product, but how do we put a grade, or how do we allow or seek to recognize and give credit for the process students are using as a part of their grade as well? All right, we're on to part 2. This time it's all about teacher praise. Once again, our researcher here is Jerry Brophy. Remember, we previously learned about Jerry Brophy as well with our beginning of the year classroom management. So what do we want? I want you to be able to examine your own conception about the ideas of praise and its effect on learning, deepen our understanding of the research on praise and feedback, and connect the original research findings to additional research and references beyond our classroom, and practice giving appropriate feedback in classroom situations. So here's what research says. Praise is much more effective when teachers use it selectively. If teachers overuse praise or use it indiscriminately, the praise becomes ambiguous and meaningless to students. And this is a really easy kind of trap to fall into. Oh, that was a great job. Well, why was it a great job? And again, we don't have to recognize every single time that something happens, but we do want to praise different parts. And we're going to talk about those parts in just a little bit. We know more effective teachers concentrate their praise on genuine student accomplishments. If you are not genuine in your praise or your feedback, students will see right through that. And students want meaningful comments on their work. It's really easy to say great job, but it'd be better to say that's a great job because. Some praise is misused. We can have what is called vicarious reinforcement. The intent here is not so much to praise the desired behavior, but rather to send a message to other students to change their behavior. Like, oh, look, Billy finally decided to raise his hand. Really, I explained my expectations for Billy, that it's a big deal he raised his hand. And I'm also telling other students that you need to raise your hand as well. That's probably not the best way to do it. And its true intent is to manipulate others rather than to be sincere. And again, this is one of those difficult things to kind of find the appropriate level of feedback for students or the appropriate praise for students. Because sometimes you are really proud that, hey, we've been working on getting the student to raise their hand or to sit down quietly. And as long as that praise and feedback is genuine, it should still be effective. When teachers consistently and publicly praise some students for substance or genuine accomplishments and others for mere form, it establishes our expectations. So if you're always telling one student, oh man, that was a really insightful response that you just gave, versus thanks for raising your hand, Billy, that makes a huge difference and communicates what we expect our students or what expectations we have for our students. We want to make sure that our expectations are high for all students, and we have to be aware that the language that we use towards students when praising them reveals our expectations for them. Something to keep in mind. Praise should focus on the student's accomplishments and not on the teacher as an authority figure or an evaluator. Focus on what the student has done, what the student has accomplished, the skills that they've gained or improved on. Boil it down to 3 points. Effective teacher praise is contingent, specific, and credible. Contingent means delivered in an appropriate and timely manner and upon a student's performance of a desired or noteworthy behavior. So just like when you make a contingent offer on a home, I'm going to sell mine. Once I sell mine, I can buy yours. Our praise should be based on the student's performance or behavior. And then I want to key in here on appropriate and timely. So this kind of goes back to delivering those expectations. What is it that we're praising? And am I doing it with a level of immediacy so the student understands what they've done and why it is appropriate or desired? Effective praise is specific. It focuses on students' performance and recognizes genuine accomplishments. So this can be anything from, I remember teaching a remedial reading class where we had students who were struggling readers heading into 9th grade or maybe in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd percentile. And when they grew to the 5th or the 6th or the 7th or the 8th or the 10th percentile, that was something that really took a lot of time and energy and effort on their behalf. From us as teachers and from their parents helping out, but also from them. And even that small amount of growth from the 1st percentile to the 5th percentile is something that should be recognized because it is a genuine accomplishment, especially for those students who are struggling in a specific area or with a skill or concept. Credible. Kids know when we're being sincere and when we are not. So our praise needs to be credible. It's sincere. It leaves the student convinced that the teacher has considered their performance carefully. It's really easy to toss out compliments that are off the cuff without necessarily thought put into them. I know as an English teacher, I usually have a bank of comments that I have available for particularly writing assignments, so that I might have a canned comment that was a really effective use of. And then I would, simile or metaphor in your personal narrative. And then I would go on to explain, here's why it's effective. So we have to make sure when we're offering that praise that we're doing it in a credible manner, and that it's not just a off-the-cuff comment without any thought put into it. At the same time, we need to balance, again, what the student's performance or desired behavior is. So while teacher praise has no significant impact on student conduct, academic performance, or other classroom processes, feedback is essential to student learning. Feedback is essential to student learning. So, what is the right amount of feedback? Well, we want to focus on a learning target or topic. It should be developmentally appropriate for individual students, and we should balance our comments about strengths and weaknesses. The mode of our feedback can be oral, written, or demonstrative or demonstrative. So the oral comments are those things, thank you for raising your hand, or I really appreciate the thought that you put into your response. Written things, I use, like I said, canned comments when commenting on student writing, whether that's an essay or a narrative, or demonstrative feedback. Literally demonstrating, here is the appropriate way to do something. It's also important that students get feedback from their teachers and from their fellow classmates. And as teachers, we should try to get feedback from our students as well. I've often found when we're in the peer responding process in 9th grade, when we write our personal narratives, that I can make as many comments as I want till I'm blue in the face with comments. But oftentimes the comments that students make to fellow students are the most effective. We must consider our students' developmental level and their reading ability when it comes to that written feedback. This is a really hard thing to balance because I want all my students to read all of my comments. At the same time, I know that I need to use words that are appropriate for them and whatever their current academic level is. Especially if you're in the elementary, writing down or written comments may not be the most appropriate form of feedback. And then we need to decide whether this is public or private feedback. I've had and really have tried to make a concentrated effort when I'm looking for student exemplars that I always get my students' permission. And I'll explain to them, look, I'll remove your name. I don't have any problem with that, but I'd like to use your work as an example of something. And oftentimes students are very receptive to that. On the other hand, I've sometimes have made the mistake of just putting up a student example up there. And even if it's a great example, students are embarrassed by it. They don't necessarily want to be recognized in front of their peers for doing something truly outstanding. So we just have to keep in mind that students have a different level of comfortability when it comes to that feedback that they might receive, and whether it's most appropriate to give that feedback in public or in private. So now that we've talked the different contexts of feedback, let's talk about specifically the types of feedback. So positives are simple affirmations. Yep, that's correct, or exactly. And oftentimes, positive feedback doesn't necessarily have to put an evaluation on there, like that was good. Short, simple, declarative, that's correct, or that's incorrect, are fine. Constructive feedback, I fall into this trap a lot. My feedback tends to be very lengthy because I like to talk a lot, and I have to keep kind of this idea in mind. So instructive feedback is acknowledging the correct response and providing additional relevant information. For example, that's right, it's an insect and it has 6 legs. Or correct, you get a secondary color by mixing 2 primary colors. So this type of feedback, again, it does need to be short, relevant, and to the point at the same time. Types of feedback, continued, we also have negative. Even with negative responses, keep it simple. Nope, or no, that's not correct, or not exactly. Corrective feedback is giving a clue to the correct response itself. Not exactly. Remember, I before E, except after C. Or, I like your thinking, but make sure you consider how the character felt in that situation. I find myself doing corrective feedback quite a bit, especially when it comes to open-ended questions when we're discussing things like literature or poetry in my class. A lot of students are very hesitant because they think, oh, well, that's not the correct answer. And I like to point out to them that, well, in English, at least, there's oftentimes a lot of correct answers. And even in math and science, there are a lot of correct ways, a lot of different ways to get the correct answer oftentimes. So corrective feedback helps kind of guide students toward a path that will eventually lead to the correct answer or response. So what are some of the common themes that we see? Well, in instruction and assessment, we want to be able to make sure we're monitoring our students' learning, that we offer feedback to them, and that students self-assess. I try to make sure my students, especially when they're handing in a long-term project, whether that's a slideshow or a video or a paper, that they almost always fill out the rubric that we're using to evaluate that through a self-evaluation or self-assessment process. Because it tells me kind of what their thinking is. And oftentimes, students can be harsher on themselves and can be their own worst critics, especially some of our higher achieving students. Now, occasionally you also get students who are not as high achieving and who have kind of an irrational amount of confidence. Like, oh, yep, 4s, that was perfect. I got everything right on my project. And that is a great time to have a conversation with the student and say, well, what are the criteria that you looked at? And oftentimes it's just, well, I just kind of did the rubric. I didn't put any thought into it. And we want our students to be metacognitive about that. And then we have professional responsibilities when we're communicating with our families, that we provide information to them about how their student is progressing. And again, we have to make the determination using our professional judgment about what kind of progress we need to communicate with that family about. Consider how much, the type of feedback, and even the mode of feedback that you're using based on the student and the family's background. So by now you've got to the end of, hopefully this will be about a half-hour long interactive video. You'll get 1 hour's worth of credit towards Foundations 1 once you have completed this interactive video, which I'll be posting on Nearpod.